Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 20 on the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. And if you haven't listened to us before, this is a great episode to jump in on because I'm host. No, I'm just kidding. Because we are going to be featuring, it's summertime, weeds are growing, it's fishing season. What are we using? Like the plagues of Egypt, we bring forth frogs.
We all just dumped
that one's all cruddy and stuck.
all of our frogs onto the table, and then when I put them away, I'm going to pretend that half of Andrew's are mine and put them in my box.
How come all yours are beat up and mine are like pristine over here?
Because I catch fish. So that is why it's a good episode to jump in, because frogs jump.
Is that the interesting fishing fact, Jesse?
That is the interesting fishing fact. What rating
Frogs
do
jump. That's probably going to be the first F of the show, I'm afraid.
Fair.
So our main topic today is obviously frog fishing. We also have an interesting fishing fact that's going to start off the episode, which Jesse will handle right now, and we're going to see if it lives up to its name of being interesting.
Oh, this is interesting. So I had such a good amount of people message me and have good interaction with the loon facts a few weeks ago. It was a lot of people were like, "Man,
It was good. That's
that's very interesting." And you know what? When I prepared for that one, I realized that there was no way you could do all the interesting facts about loons in one thing. You could do a full podcast episode.
Oh, so you're riding your own coattails is what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. So I thought
buying his laurels.
that we would do loon facts part 2.
Is this a series? It's like every month they're like, loon facts.
Yeah, even
Part
in the winter.
17.
Where are the loons now? They're gone. No, but so a few weeks ago, I forget exactly how long, but a few weeks ago, we learned a few loon facts, and the main ones that are memorable is loons are heavy,
Yes.
like Michael Phelps, right? They have solid bones to help them dive, like Michael Phelps, and they can dive to
Facts.
depths of 200 feet. Unlike Michael Phelps. I have about 5 facts, and I thought that we could just say a fact and banter about it, because some of these are pretty interesting. Okay. So the first fact, remember how last time we said loons basically can't walk on land? They suck at it.
Yes.
They're clumsy, but they're designed literally to be amazing swimmers. And we were both like, I've never seen a loon on land.
Yeah.
I never have. I've never seen one on land. You always see them in the water, but
I've seen them on land sitting in like a nest that's like beside water, and they just like push themselves into water. That's the most land activity I've ever seen a loon have.
have you ever seen have you ever seen a loon fly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
have you ever seen
them
a
fly.
loon take off?
They like run in the water?
Yeah. So this is
they're
the
pretty
fact.
cool.
Okay. We compared loons to being like submarines last time, but loons are actually like airplanes too. So because they're so heavy, they're chunky, they're thick.
Hold on. Did you know that birds are like airplanes? This is your fact?
Yes. They need a runway of water to take off. Okay.
So they can't take off on land then?
No.
That's awesome.
I assume they can.
Terrible.
So they will flop their wings frantically and run across the water surface for around 90 feet in order to gain enough speed for liftoff.
Wow.
So it's oftentimes like I think of birds that do that like swans.
Yeah,
You
like
see
the
swans
big
just
birds.
like running across the water, flapping their wings furiously. But loons do the same thing because literally they're so heavy that they can't literally just take off. They have to run along the surface, flapping their wings just to take off. Imagine for a second you're fishing in a kayak or canoe, and all of a sudden this loon is just beelining it right towards your boat. It's like, with its red eyes looking at you. Oh, that'd be scary. So I don't know if I've ever seen a loon take off, but if I did, that'd be pretty cool to see. Now, once they're flying, they are slow to take off, right? It takes them a while to actually get in the air. But once they're flying, what would you say that their max speed of flying is? Just guess. It's way higher than you think.
60 kilometers an hour.
Double.
What?
120 kilometers an hour. I was like, what?
Wow.
That's literally like the
I
average
wouldn't
speed of a
expect
car
it-
on the 401.
Ducks, I think, max out at 60 or
Yeah.
70. Like, I did not expect that from a loon.
They're like little
Considering, again,
red-eyed
they're
missiles. So I thought that was insane. Like 120K.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. And the cool thing is you may think, oh, they're heavy. They can't fly very far. Wrong. They can fly really far. In fact, there was a U.S. Geological Survey. They tracked a loon with GPS that flew over 1,000 kilometers in 24 hours. Now, to put that in perspective, that's if you were a loon and you took off flopping furiously across the water in Toronto, you would land. I'm not saying they didn't land throughout the day, but that's from flying from Toronto all the way to Fredericton, New Brunswick.
Wow.
In one day.
It takes over half a day to drive that. Like,
yeah. Now, like, that gave me a whole new respect for loons. Like, literally, that's a long distance to fly. Oh, I'm like, oh, an albatross could handle that. No, loon's like, no problem, man. I'm on the dollar for a reason. They know how to stretch a buck. Okay, here's another one that really just blew my mind. Did you know that loons eat rocks?
Now, I didn't know loons did, but I know that like bears and stuff will eat rocks to help with digestion.
Exactly. And it's probably for the same reason. So loons don't have teeth.
Yeah.
Right? So they cannot chew their food. Obviously, you don't see them chewing on a perch or whatever. So they swallow fish whole.
It'd be terrifying if birds chewed food.
Oh, especially seagulls just watching you, just chewing. So anyway, loons, they swallow fish whole. Obviously, they don't chew. They don't use fork and knife. Like, come on.
How barbaric.
Exactly. So when you consume food whole, it obviously makes digestion difficult. Mm-hmm. And that's why we chew our food. We're not going to like eat full hot dogs and stuff. Like, there are some freaks out there that do that, but not recommended. You probably have terrible problems in the bathroom. So because of that, loons are smart. They're like, you know what? I don't want bathroom problems. So what they do is they swallow small rocks and it grinds the food in their stomach and helps with digestion.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Yeah.
You have to think, like, how does the bird know to do that? It's just like, oh man, I got some crapping problems. Just like, well, I'll just eat some rocks, no problem.
Yeah, it's like, how can I fix this? By eating something solid I can't pass naturally?
Yeah.
Like, wow, that seems like a genius idea.
And the last fact, which is very cool, and I did not know this at all, is loons, their eye color is red. Like, whenever we see them, it's red.
Yeah.
But their eyes actually change color throughout the year.
Really?
Loons have what they say, beautiful crimson red eyes. I call them creepy serial killer eyes. But that's only during the spring and the summer, during mating season. During the winter, a loon's eyes change to a dark gray color. Now, scientists, again, I love when scientists are like, we don't know. They don't know a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Scientists do not know why their eyes turn red, but some think it helps with underwater vision or to attract mates. Imagine that. You literally have double pink eye and you see some girl and you're like, how's it going? She's like, hey, nice red eyes. So I thought that's pretty cool. Like, the more I learn about loons, the more I realize they're fascinating birds.
Yeah.
Like, I'd never think anything like that about loons. I was just like, oh, okay, it's literally a bird that just eats my fish that I want to catch.
Now when I go camping and whatnot, or I go fishing and I see a loon, I'm not only going to appreciate that moment, but I'm going to be thinking of all these weird random facts about them. I don't know if it's going to enhance a moment or to creep me out by it.
I just picture Andrew just slowly canoeing and it's quiet and he sees a loon and then he just hears like my voice in his head. Did you know that loons eat rocks? I'll always be there with you, man. Even when I'm not. So anyway, that was the interesting fishing fact and it was backed by popular demand. And who knows? There's more loon facts out there. So maybe there'll be a part 3 down the road. I'm not going to push it right now, though.
Yeah, let's give loons a break.
Okay.
But that being said, you push the envelope with loons.
Yeah.
I did enjoy that a lot.
Excellent.
I'm not sure what I rated your old loon fact. I think I rated it an A+.
It was 100%.
I'm gonna go with an A, purely because it's not completely original idea.
Okay.
However, it's still well brought out, and they were interesting facts. So you get an A. That's still very good.
Yay.
You're on a roll with that.
Sweet.
So on to our main topic. Actually, before we go to the main topic, I just wanted to mention our sponsor for this episode.
It's a cool one.
So it's Bass Magnet, which is the same company as Waterwolf Lures, or co-owned, or I'm not sure exactly how that works, but they use the same rubber in their plastics.
Yeah.
So they are giving away a prize pack. We're not sure exactly everything that's going into it. It's going to be an assortment of stuff from them, but they have some amazing baits. And I know you even have a couple that are sitting out here.
The jelly shad.
And
we met Mike.
Yeah.
At Cancast. Super nice guy. We actually bought a bunch of his Bass Magnet stuff. Like, what did you buy?
I bought some tube jigs.
I bought some tubes as well.
The colors on his tube jigs are insane. Like, I don't know if he individually hand paints every single one of those tube jigs, but it sure looks like it.
Yeah, and a lot of his plastics, it's like custom molds.
Yeah.
And then he I don't know, the technical term. I'm not a bait maker, but he does the mold of the plastic. And then on some of these that we'll talk about in a sec, these jelly shads, he paints them.
Yeah.
And his paint jobs are fantastic. I was surprised. Like I would suck at painting. I'd be like, you get black, you get white, you get green pumpkin. That's it. He has like all these crazy colors. I'm like, it's Picasso. So yeah, let's talk about these jelly shads for a sec. Because I actually had an opportunity to try.
I noticed one is missing out of those packs.
Yeah, Pike bit me off. So anyway, the jelly shad, I'm going to try to explain this to you on the air if you can't see. It is a ribbed swim bait, but it doesn't have the traditional thin minnow profile. It has like a more higher shad / bluegilly profile.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing with this is it's got a solid center and then these really like soft ribs all along the bait. And then the tail, it's not an overly big tail. It's probably the perfect size for this bait. They look amazing. They look like, to me, like the perfect bluegill swim bait imitation.
Nice.
Which is something you don't really see. You see a lot of bait makers or companies that come out with like minnow, like thin, and then also like shad.
Or the really long, like whip, like almost it's twice as long as it should be, almost before the paddle tail.
Yeah, and this color here, it's called bluegill. It's a 3.8 inch jelly shad bluegill, and it's literally that looks like a bluegill.
That looks.
If you look at that,
I love that color.
Yeah, and the cool thing about these is as soon as I saw them in person, I was like, okay, this is a versatile bait.
Yes.
The first thing I did is I put it on a chatterbait. And if you listen to our chatterbait episode a few weeks ago, a few weeks ago, I was mentioning how like I don't generally like putting a paddle tail on a chatterbait, but the action on these, the paddle tail isn't overly aggressive. It works really good. In fact, I paired it up with a chatterbait last weekend. I went out fishing and I was like, oh, I want to try these. I put it on. He has this like cool color. Let's see what that one's called. Chartreuse Flash or something.
Yeah.
And I put it on a white and chartreuse chatterbait and I was fishing around these weeds for bass. And this pike just came up and bit me off. I was like, oh, first cast too. First cast. I was like watching this thing swim in. I was like, dang, that's a good looking trailer. And this pike came from underneath the boat and nipped me off. I was like, I was pretty mad. But yeah, his plastics are fantastic. Awesome. He makes, again, he also owns the company Water Wolf Lures. And they make fantastic baits too. But the prize pack, we don't know exactly what's in it yet, but definitely follow our Instagram.
All of his stuff is great.
Yeah.
So whatever he throws in there, Mike's going to look after you 100%.
Yeah. And also as a bonus, made in Ontario.
Yeah.
Made in Ontario. So that's cool. We'll talk a little bit more about that giveaway in a sec, but we're going to get back to the main topic because I could talk about jelly shads forever. Peanut butter and jelly shads.
So how old do you think the hollow-bodied frog is? When was the first one made?
A long time ago.
If you take a guess, like what year?
40s.
40s. So
he's going to be like 1861.
1895.
Dang it, I was close.
Like, I did not expect to see anything. So that was the first production hollow body frog. It was the Hastings weedless casting frog. And when you look at it, yeah, in the description online, it's pretty cool. So it has a eyelet protruding out the nose of the hollow frog. Comes back. It has solid legs similar to these lunker hunts here. Is this a lunker hunt? I think so.
Yep.
So it has had similar legs to this that just kind of hung inside, like almost creating a diamond shape with the legs, with two hooks that weren't on the body, but they were actually backed by the legs.
Okay.
So it would ride upright. It had an internal weight, and it had essentially all the same qualifications as a modern day frog, but in the 1800s. Wow. And this is not. That's being said. It wasn't his first one. He patented it and started producing them in very late 1895. The patent was down for these things already.
That's like way earlier than I thought.
Like I thought, okay, maybe Spro or Scum Frog, they've been around forever. Like they've done hollow body frogs for a long time. Yeah. Another one that's pretty old. I thought kind of the first frogs would be like these. And like, how many times have you seen those in like your dad's or grandpa's tackle box?
Yeah.
Like I know my dad
look like they're from the 50s.
So these are actually from 87. This was the Michigan Burke Flexo frog. Huh. And so they are soft, but they just have an exposed hook. They float upright. They're not weedless. But I thought that was kind of going to be some of the first frog imitations. Now, there were topwater frogs that were hard baits that were around before, that predated that one even. But the first hollow-bodied frog, essentially the precursor to everyone that we love and know today, was back in 1895.
That's crazy.
It blew my mind when I found that out. So there are variations of the hollow body frog. In fact, Jesse brought one that's not even a frog at all. It's a fish.
It's the live target sunfish, the worst hollow-bodied frog imitation you can ever throw because it sucks. The hookup ratio is terrible.
We'll talk a bit about hookup ratios and whatnot in a bit. There are a few different varieties of hollow-bodied frogs. Primarily, that's what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to eliminate these two old ones that are on the table because they are not
hollow-body frogs. Hollow body.
Yeah. So you have your classic ones like a live target right there. So this is your I'd say generic hollow body frog. That's your base.
Typical shape.
You have poppers. This is a scum frog popper. There's a coppers popping frog there. The Terminator walking popper.
Got the Jackal Gavacho, which is a popper frog.
So there's a few different popping options. I got the Z-Man one as well. So there's popping frogs and there's walking frogs. So another one from Z-Man there. Walking frogs can be identified because they often have a tapered belly, and they really help it to track in the water really nicely.
Yeah,
so
it's
this
like a
is the
V-haul.
Z-Man. Yeah, the Z-Man one, it walks really, really well. The Terminator walking frogs, they walk really well. Obviously, that's part of their name.
Yeah.
This one that you hate walks amazingly well.
The live target sunfish. It walks great. I wanted to love it so much, but it has probably some of the worst reviews. It's not even just me. Look up reviews for that. Everyone trashes it.
So you have the walking frogs. You have frogs that are designed for heavy cover. So that's ones like the scum frog. This is a launch frog. This works really well. It does have kind of exposed hook points, which we're going to go a bit more into. But it generally sits pretty, because of the internal weight system, it generally lands right in its belly. But they do have other versions like even this popping scum frog. They're designed they have very flat bellies, and they kind of sit right on top of that cover to bring in. And then we also have things like finesse frogs. So there's this little mini one, even smaller ones that you can use on your spinning gear. There's a few different options when it comes to your hollow-bodied frogs as to what you can do, what styles you can get.
And there's literally like 30 frogs on the table right now, and there's tons of options.
There's lots of options. So where do you like to fish frogs primarily?
Around heavy cover. Yeah, obviously.
So thick weeds like cheese mats.
Yeah.
Anywhere from like just lily pads to cheese mats kind of thing.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be matted vegetation on the surface. Like one of my favorite ways to fish a frog is like skipping them under trees. Yeah. Like overhanging trees. That's fantastic. Around lily pads is classic. Cheese mats, reeds. Yeah. I think a lot of people, they see a weedless frog and they're like, I have to cast this in heavy cover. You literally don't. No. You can cast them technically in open water and still catch fish, but I like them because you can cast them anywhere. If it's one of those things where you're fishing different kinds of slop and weeds, a frog's great because it'll go over all that.
100%. So I figured we'll talk about some of our favorites. My favorite one overall for a frog is the scum frog launch frog. And they recently introduced the launch frog extra small, the XS. So it's a little bit smaller profile.
It's not extra small. It's literally...
It's not. It's a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
But
honestly, I feel like the extra small scum frog is the perfect size for Ontario.
It is. Yeah. That's what I agree. This is just a hair too big. This solved that issue.
Yeah. And again, a lot of these frog companies, they are designing frogs for the southern states where the bass get huge and they fish bigger stuff. So like, not that you can't catch, big bass on big frogs here, but generally I find in Ontario, the compact size or the smaller size, you get more bites.
Yes.
Myself.
Now, that being said, again, the launch frog, I've had, like this one is getting chewed up. This is the first launch frog I got. The second scum frog I ever purchased.
I know that thing is always tied on your rod when we go frog fishing.
I love this thing. And I've caught most of my frog fish on this frog because the hookup ratio on this one is fantastic. So I'll go into a couple features as to why this one, or what to look for, I like to look for in a frog. It happens to be that this one is a good example of the things that I like. So it has a very soft body.
Probably the softest body in any frog I've ever seen.
Yeah. It's very, especially once it gets worn in, it gets even softer. And the hook points are barely covered. In fact, this one, as it's been relaxing over the years, the hook points are actually really starting to get exposed on the top of it. And what happens is it becomes a little less weedless if it happens to roll. Like I said, these are nice because they have the tungsten weight at the back. They cast really far and they just sit up on the bottom. So I rarely get weeds on these hooks, even though they are upturned a bit. but the hookup percentage on this is one of the best I've ever had on any frog.
It's got to be close to like 95%.
Yeah.
Like it's really good.
So I am excited because these are brand new. I haven't used them yet this year, but the XS, I'm really excited to see. It's a slightly smaller hook, but they still have, again, they are upturned. The Scum Frog is known for always having a good hookup ratio. Even their original one I used, I had really good success with that one.
Yeah.
So that's a couple of the features I really like about the Scum Frog. And two things I look for is, or one of the biggest things I look for is, will the hookup percentage be high?
Mm-hmm.
Because as we talked about that fish, you had how many strikes in this? Like we were fishing
the live target sunfish. Yeah.
You had so many bass blow up in this thing, and you were adamant that you were going to catch one, but you fished, I'd say, almost the entire morning. You had,
I think
maybe a dozen or more blow ups before you actually hooked a fish.
I think I only caught 2 fish on that thing.
Yeah.
And it's not just me. If you look up reviews on this stupid thing, it's poorly designed. It's too hard on the back. So when the fish pushes down, the tail flips in the way of the hooks. Like it's a poor design.
Yeah.
It literally walks and casts a mile and fish blow up on it. You just will not hook that many. And I know there's going to be some of you that are like, what are you talking about? I catch tons of fish on these. Look at reviews online of these. Yeah. The majority of the people hate them. There are way better frogs to cast than this, believe me.
Yep.
But one thing I will mention though is I think a lot of people think frogs imitate frogs. I think bass a lot of times, we're probably going to get into this. Mm-hmm. They think frogs look like bluegill on the surface or bait fish. And I feel like that's why the live target sunfish is a good presentation. If the hookup ratio was better, it would be the only thing I'd throw.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hate that. Get that away from me. I keep it in my box just to remind me that it sucks. I'm like, oh, I should use that. No. Okay.
So we'll go into some different areas where we like to fish, and then kind of we'll cover that whole scenario of fishing that frog. So we started talking about weeds. Again, when we're fishing a weedy area, like we talked about, having the hook points, making sure that they're sheltered will be good. And I'm not going to be primarily, if it's thick weeds, I'm not going to be looking for like a walking frog. Oftentimes I'll go for one that, because what'll happen in the walking frog, because it has a V shape, it'll lay on its side and it's more likely to start picking up weeds on that hook.
Yeah.
But the flat bottom frogs, they like to sit right on top. They'll sit nice and flat. You can pull them forward. But whenever you come into a pocket, so you're fishing, let's say this big, like cheese mat or just a lot of like floating weeds, and you pop it along, what you need is a frog heavy enough, you don't want it to penetrate the weeds, but you don't want something so light where when it lands in the weeds, the fish may not notice that there's something landed on the weeds above them.
Yeah.
It needs to make an impact.
There needs to be some heft.
Yeah. So again, that's why these are fantastic, because they have the tungsten weight. Again, I'm not going to go only about scum frog because that'd be extremely biased, but
yeah, Andrew's a big fan.
I'm a big
you didn't even ask me what my favorite
frog. So what's your favorite frog then? If we're fishing weeds, let's say,
okay,
what would be your first choice frog?
Okay, so like as you mentioned, there's frogs that walk really well, that have like a V-shaped bottom that walk really good. And then there's frogs like the scum frog that have flat bottoms that, generally speaking,
they're very hard to walk.
They're hard to walk.
If not impossible at times.
That being said, I did use, what is this? The Scum Frog Trophy Series. I got this one. Mm-hmm. It's just below the launch series. I think they're like $12 or $9 or $10. I don't know. I could get it to walk, but it was very difficult compared to other frogs. My go-to, as you can see, I've caught over 50 bass on this frog, this live target. You can tell because it used to be white. Now it's clear in certain sections.
Yep.
And the eyeballs are gone. The live target, just regular, I don't even know what it's called, the live target frog in white, it works good. It walks good. It's not the best walking frog, but it walks pretty good. Mm-hmm. It's not the best slop frog, but it handles slop. It's like, if I could only have one frog, this frog or this design of a frog does it all.
Yeah.
If I'm going to fish literally just slop, I'm probably going to pick up, like Andrew said, the scum frog, because it has a flat bottom and it literally just goes, it like sleds right on top of the slop.
Yeah.
It doesn't flip over, so the hooks don't get crap on them. And even like Andrew said, the hook points are a little bit not as, hidden as most other frogs. But since it sits flat on its belly, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's always pointing up. So I'd have to say those two frogs, a scum frog of some kind with a flat bottom and the live target, have been great. We'll talk more about all these other frogs. Yeah. Like, we love trying different frogs, and I've tried literally 15, 20 different ones. And I'll tell you my favorites and ones that I'd never buy again.
So when you're fishing, we talked a little bit about how to fish it over the weeds of, you can pull it in. Oftentimes when I'm retrieving it, I just give like a tug motion with the rod, and your frog is kind of just like popping forward.
Yeah.
Just like a real frog would be, just kind of making short little hops across the top of these weeds, trying not to get noticed by bass, essentially.
Yeah.
In nature, that's what they're trying to avoid. So a frog coming across the surface of the weeds, and then as soon as you get to a pocket, just rests into the water, and the legs can hang down. And that's oftentimes when you're going to get your blow up, because you give a pause there. You're giving the bass the opportunity now in the best place for a bass to actually get those hooks in its mouth.
Yeah.
Because
sometimes when they come up through the weeds, especially lily pads, I find that they'll grab a bunch of crap in their mouth too, and then grab the frog, and their mouth is full of literally crap. Other times they'll completely miss the frog because there's so much obstruction in the way.
Largemouth bass in the weeds are like the stormtroopers of the fish world.
They can't hit anything.
They have poor aim. So is there any other way that you like to fish with or alter your retrieve when you're fishing weeds?
Like heavy weeds?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do basically the same thing. I'm going to cast it out. And again, I like a frog that's a little heavier. A lot of guys will like push like rattles or weights inside of their frog to make them heavier and press down more on the mat. We're talking like cheese mats.
Yes.
Like slop and like scum. If I'm fishing lily pads, a standard frog's fine.
Yep.
And I just like to, I kind of snake them through, and I'll hop them up on pads and then pop them back in the water. And then especially when you get to a hole, like you said, I like to just let them sit. Because usually I think bass will track a frog.
Yeah.
And then when it plops into a hole, they're just like, boom, that's their opportunity. So like in that hole, this is why I like a frog that walks. I can walk the frog almost in place and just have it literally just going back and forth. Like its head will just be twitching back and forth. Well, at the same time, not really moving it forward at all.
Yeah. When you get the good walking frogs, you can keep it in that like 1 foot pocket.
Yeah.
For like 12 little walks on it.
And I've argued with people so many times that people are like, it doesn't matter. You don't have to learn how to walk a frog. Fish will hit it anyway. That may be true on some of the easy lakes you fish. But if you know how to walk a frog, I'd say you're in the top 10% of frog fishermen. If you don't walk your frog, you're missing a huge opportunity. Yeah. If you're just pulling your frog into a pocket and then pulling it out, yeah, that'll probably work most of the time. But sometimes when fish aren't, like, say after a cold front or something, the fish aren't really active. If you can just twitch that frog in one place and it's twitching back and forth, they can't stand it and they smack it. Like I've had days where literally I 100% out fishing the guy I'm fishing with, and he's just reeling the frog in and hopping it along, and I'm literally walking it back to the boat. It's a totally different action that the fish, they're not accustomed to if they just see regularly frogs coming in and out. Yeah. But again, you can only walk frogs in water. You can't walk them on top of pond scum and slop.
So another area, we'll just move essentially just outside of the weed bed and fishing weed lines.
Okay.
So one of the frogs that I like when I'm fishing weed lines is, like just said, a walking frog. So one of my favorites is the Z-Man walking frog, and it has a very good pronounced V shape on the belly, and it's a bit longer. So it is almost like those cigar-shaped walking baits. It walks really nice and easy. So I like this one a lot. So the same thing, cast, retrieve, and I'll fish it just like a spook. Just bring it back, walking it the whole way. I'll pause if there's looks like a juicy spot on the edge of the weeds, but I'll just fish around those whole weed lines with something that I can give a bit more action to. And fishing weed lines is essentially fishing like the outside edge of a really long pocket. So I used to think too, and that bass will track your baits underwater. We've seen that happen.
Yeah.
And then they'll hit it in when you have it paused in that pool because you give them the opportunity. At the same time, those little pockets, oftentimes there'll be a higher concentration of fish around there because fish are where the food are. So if there's food, there's a whole world underneath those weeds. They can be scattered about. But you have access to all the forage that's under the weeds, and then you have a pocket. That's where insects are visible. That's where frogs are going to be visible. That's where any other surface feeding food is going to be accessible to the bass, mostly in those pockets. So there oftentimes can be either a concentration, or your bigger fish can be located around those small pockets, those openings, because they have even more opportunities now to get food.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you're fishing a weed line, you're fishing just a big edge where they have all this cover. Now they have access to open water. They have access to anything on the surface. So the weed lines A lot of guys, they fire right into a weed bed and start casting into the weed beds. Like fish the outskirts first.
Yeah. Fish the spot in front of the spot you want to fish.
Yes.
And then fish the spot. You don't want to just roll in your boat right on top of the fish. Because especially on days where it's like overcast or maybe there's a little bit of chop on the water, those fish, they may feel safe. You have to think, like bass especially, like there's ospreys, there's loons, there's animals and predators that if the water's slick calm, they can dive in and grab a bass. And bass and all fish, they are programmed to know that from a very young age. Even bass that are like 3-4 pounds, they're not safe from an osprey.
No.
So when the water's slick calm, they're going to be on that weed line just inside the weeds, but they have no problem darting out to grab something. But as soon as there's a little chop on the water to break up the surface visibility, or it's cloudy or something like that, these fish venture out from the weed lines. They're still going to relate to them, but like you can catch fish a decent distance away from the actual weeds.
Yeah.
So don't just blast into the spot and start casting into the weeds, because like you could have just drove over, your PB bass.
Fishing the outskirts in is always a good idea because the bass might be moving on their way back to that shallow water where you think they are, but they might be on their way there still. So another area would be timber. So if you're fishing, and timber is like, for me, I always think of timber as trees falling over like right on the shore.
Yeah.
So
like laydowns.
Yeah. Which I love fishing topwaters around laydowns. Yeah. It's fun because often it's a dead tree. If it's as you say, new tree, new fish. That was back in the day.
Which doesn't usually apply.
But oftentimes these laydowns, these trees are dead. Like it's all just like bare branches.
Yep.
And it's like, it's not much cover. It's not really, there's no real shade around it, whatnot. There's not like nice leaves. It's not under a nice willow tree. But it's structure. They're relating to the structure now. It's not so much about the cover at that point. And you'd be surprised what you can't see because you motor up to that tree and you'll have a bunch of like moss and stuff growing on it or a bunch of like algae underwater. And it's like very alive with stuff growing on it, subsurface.
Which attracts minnows, which attracts bait fish. Yeah.
So again, essentially it's a different type of weed almost, greenery life that these bass are sitting in. So you can fish it very similar to how you'd be fishing a weed bed.
Yeah, and it's a lot safer than using a treble-hooked topwater sometimes.
100%.
I have no fear chucking a weedless frog. Me and Andrew, we'll be like, whatever. It'll be like the worst, like disgusting gnarled up tree. It's like, just cast the frog right in it, and half the time you're just slowly
it'll like skip up into the branches. You're like, I'll just pull it out.
And then you'll cast a frog at a hit a branch and then just like spin around another branch 10 times. You're like, well, that's not coming out.
Quick, make a cast before I absolutely blow this spot.
Yeah. Relatable.
So some of the frogs I like fishing around timber, again, I'm not a fan of the scum frog for that because it has more of an exposed hook point.
It's called a scum frog, not a lay down frog.
So it's really good for your weeds. However, the walking frogs, so the Terminator walking frog, popping, or like that, or a popper. So either one. Popping is nice because you're fishing a very generally localized spot. And like you were saying last week or a couple weeks ago about topwater fishing, walking bait versus a popping bait is you like a walking bait for covering water, but for fishing a spot, you like a popper. So essentially a tree is a pretty localized spot. So poppers are a really good opportunity there. Would you agree with that statement, wise one?
Yeah. So like when it comes to frog fishing, if there's no slop or heavy vegetation, I'm almost always having a popping frog on. And one thing I learned about popping frogs, I never really thought of it before, is they actually walk really good. You have to think the face, which cups water, as you walk it, it actually causes it to splash water side to side as you walk it. So it actually creates a lot of disturbance. Now, obviously, if you just pop them down and like fish them like a full out popper, they're going to splash a lot of water. But if you're walking them from side to side, it bloops waters this way, then that way, then this way, then that way. And it's a very unique approach. And it may be something that, the bass haven't seen. It's slightly different. And I've had really good success. And one of my favorite walking frogs, and it's a popping frog, is the jackal gavacho. This is popular. And I always for years looked at these and I was like, I'm going to try it. And man, they work really good. Highly recommend these frogs. But yeah, popping frog all the way. And I like to just cast it. I'll cast it right on shore. And then I'll just pull them into the water and then pop them right out. And sometimes these drop-offs, like the trees go down a drop-off. So like where the tree enters the water will be like, a foot, 2 feet of water.
Yep.
And then it'll be like 20 feet as you work it out. So like bass, they're not always relating to the bottom. Sometimes they're underneath the trees way out. So don't forget to fish all the way around the tree, even if it's in deep water,
And
like 20 feet of water.
That tree, you look at the top of it, like think of icebergs, right? You're only seeing the top 10% of that iceberg. But with a tree, it could have been a 50-foot tree that you're seeing only 10 feet of at the top. And the majority of those branches and cover are, like you said, 30 feet out, 20 feet down.
Yeah. And I've had situations where I'm casting in a situation like that. And as soon as your frog hits the water, a bass just blows up on it. And that's in like 15, 20 feet of water. So obviously they're relating to the top part of the water column where the tree is at the top. They're not swimming up 20 feet in like half a second to smash a frog. Like as soon as the frog hits the water, they just blow up on it.
Yeah.
So yeah. And again, the fact that they're weedless and you can chuck them anywhere, it's such a stress relief. Like sometimes you'll have like a popper or walking bait on and you're like, you get to a spot that looks terrible and you're just like, it's not worth it.
There's probably a fish there, but
it's not
I
worth
don't
the
feel
snag.
like, yeah.
But with a frog, you're like, who cares? Just cast out.
So the next one would be fishing rice or bulrushes, like spikeweed, something that's tall. A lot of the time, like we talked before about, those are great opportunities for swim jigs.
Yep.
Because it just like glides through, or spinner baits work really well. Chatterbaits do that stuff too. So those are all like good opportunities for subsurface, but a frog is probably the best topwater. You can cast it because again, it's weedless, and you can fish it slower than if you're using, let's say, a weedless spoon. You have to burn that in, or a buzzbait, constantly on the move. The frog is a weedless walking bait. You can still walk right through the top of that. Yep. It's fantastic for that too.
And one thing that I'll add for that is another great style of bait for covering water, and they may not be hollow body frogs, is the plastic, like soft plastic frogs.
Yes. Yeah.
Thought we could talk about those. Like this is the True North Baits teaser toad, which is basically, if you've ever heard of the horny toad, the Zoom horny toad, it's been around forever. And it's basically a frog, but it has 2 cut tails on the back. Like the legs are little cut tails. So you basically fish this like a buzzbait. You cast it out and then you reel it. You have to keep on reeling it so it doesn't sink. And the legs just, it's a gentle, I don't even know the right word to describe it. Bubbling, yeah. It's not aggressive like a buzzbait, but these things, they skip really good.
Yes.
You put this and they skip under docks, they skip under trees, they go through bulrushes, and then you constantly reel them in. So it's a great way to cover water, but extremely weedless, and they smash fish. And another one I'd just like to give a shout out to, and I haven't tried these ones yet, but we're actually going on a trip soon, is the Wham Baits Whamphibian, which is a very cool bait. I'm going to show you quick because as soon as I saw these at CanCast, I bought a pack, and then I regretted not buying more, but Andrew bought some recently. But it's a similar shape. This is extremely weedless. If you put this on an EWG, an extra wide gap hook, it has like 2 legs. They're not cut tail style like a regular horny toad. They're almost like twister tails.
Yeah.
But you cast this out and you reel it in, and it just has this like crazy little
titillating,
subtle. Subtle. And I think sometimes, especially like we said, after a cold front or like a pressure system, when the fish aren't just blowing up on frogs like we want them to, something like this, that's just slightly different. It's a different approach. It's sitting slightly lower in the water column and has a subtle little kick. I think that's going to be a killer.
Yeah. And one thing I love to do with plastic frogs, or like a rubber frogs like this, is when I'm fishing it, and I'll do, again, I'll rig it weightless because generally they have enough heft. They're a big enough body bait that just a single EWG hook on it, you can cast this thing with a bait caster, no problem. And so I'll cast it out and I'll fish this like we talked before about fishing a weedless spoon, where you bring it on top of the weeds, and then when it comes to a pocket, just let it sit, and they'll start to sink. There are ones like the Z-Man goat or goat toads, and they'll actually float. A 3/0 hook.
They'll float a 4 or 5/0 hook, believe me. Yeah.
So they will stay on the surface if you wanted to use those for a similar application. But if you wanted to have a nice weightless plastic that's just like coming down and fluttering behind on its descent into a pocket, and then you start like pop it back out of the pocket, reel in, and just bring it across the surface again.
It's very natural because frogs, they do dive.
100%.
So a frog like that, or a horny toad, something that you can fish, fairly like fast along the surface, and then let it sink into the juicy spots.
Yes.
Oh.
So when it comes to frog fishing, that's a good opportunity you can now fish a little bit of subsurface as well.
And just to give a shout out to both these companies, these are both previous sponsors.
Yep.
And what I tell sponsors when we deal with them on our podcast is we'll take care of them for the rest of the season. So we like to, give some support to these people. The True North baits, what is this one called? The teaser toad, which is like a traditional horny toad style bait. And the Wham baits, Whamphibian, both made here in Ontario. We'll leave links to both these baits in the bio. If you buy any, make sure to say AOA sent you. This one actually smells pretty good. Here, smell that.
Oh, that does smell good.
Yeah. You're truly an angler. When you pick up a horrendous putrid bait, smell it and go, not bad. Everyone else like, whoa, disgusting. You're like, that'll catch.
I'm like, do they make candles out of this stuff?
Imagine that. Would you like the Zoom horny toad candle? Just burning. It's just salt.
It's just like Gulp Alive, just like sizzling on the stovetop. So another area, and this is kind of general because it covers everything we just talked about. One of my favorite ways to fish a frog is when I'm trolling slowly along a shoreline and just casting into shore. So I'm hitting every type of structure there is. I'm hitting on top of a rock flat. I'm hitting docks, under trees, into trees.
Yeah, into culverts.
Culverts, yeah, anything.
Pontoon boats.
Anything shoreline, yeah, backs of boats. Again, not hitting the boats. I try my best not to. It happens sometimes, but I mean, I never do that ever.
Literally.
I don't cast towards nice boats either because I'm too scared to. So for stuff like that, I like to get a good all-around frog. So like Jesse said, the live target is great. The perfect frog is another great example.
Here's another local company we'll give a shout to. So the Perfect Jig, Brendan has a frog called the Perfect Frog, obviously. And again, I'm a huge fan of the live target frog.
Yep.
I've always have been a big fan of that frog for years and years and years. They just the hookup ratio for me is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's great. But Perfect Jig, he has two sizes. He has 1/2 and 5/8. And the cool thing with these frogs is it's a traditional shape, almost like the live target frog.
Mm-hmm.
It's slightly different, but the difference in these is it actually has a tungsten weight,
which is generally only found on premium frogs.
Yeah. And the cool thing is these frogs cost less than a live target frog.
Yeah.
And usually, here's a tip. If you ever go to any of the shows like CanCast or the Spring Fishing Show, usually he has a deal. Like the last few times I saw, he had a deal. It was like
buy two, get one free.
No, it's buy one, get one free.
Oh, that's
There's BOGO.
better.
So I bought two. And I bought a black one and I bought a natural colored one. And I did good. Actually, I bought one last year too. Same thing happened with the other thing. I got bit off by a pike, but I caught a bunch of bass on it in the meantime. But another fantastic frog. They walk really good.
Yep.
They cast good. It's a good general all-purpose frog.
And that's the thing. So you can fish it, you can skip it, you can walk it, everything.
You don't want to fish a spot with like the wrong type of frog.
Yeah.
You have like a scum frog on and you're fishing open water and you're trying to walk it and you're like, this thing won't walk. Or the opposite. You don't want to be fishing slop with a frog that walks really good, that keeps picking up weeds because it's rolling on its side.
Yep.
You need at least two frogs.
One of my favorite frogs to fish kind of like sparse weeds with is actually... I can't remember the name of it. I got it off of a guy at the first CanCast show.
He bought it off Dave Chong.
Dave Chong, that's him. Yep. So he had these little like Japanese like micro frogs.
It's like 1/4 ounce.
It's tiny. So I cast it on my. It's not quite a BFS setup, but it's like my little crankbait setup. But I'll fish this little frog with it, and I'll fish it when there's kind of sparse weeds. I've only got 10-pound braid on that rod. I'm probably gonna go to 15 this year, but. I'm not concerned about, getting through the weeds. If I'm fishing, I don't recommend fishing slop with this.
Yeah.
One, it's not going to present very well. But as soon as I'm fishing, like a small clump of weeds, a bit of rice or something like that, a small weed bed, and it's a lot of open water around it, fishing just a nice small frog and the amount of fish I'll catch on something like this is insane. Because bass are opportunistic. They're not going to be like, oh, that frog's smaller than the one I had yesterday. Not going to touch that. Like, yeah, they're going to see something that size and just inhale it.
Well, there was that day we went out and I was fishing regular sized frogs and Andrew smoked me on that little frog because the fish, they were finicky. And that's why I hate when people are like, bass are dumb. It doesn't matter what color, what size of frog you use. It literally can sometimes.
Yep.
I was casting in the same spot.
There are days when absolutely that doesn't matter.
And I had front yard advantage. He was fishing behind me with a small frog and was catching 5-1. Yeah. What I was catching.
Another thing too. So on that day, the reason why I downsized my frog a lot was because they were coming up and they seemed to just be hitting the legs of our frogs. Yeah. So another trick that can be used is you can actually trim the legs of your frog, which is pretty well known across the board. But
this
if anyone
is something
is
that
new,
we're hearing for the first time here. Is that you can trim frog
we
legs.
invented this.
Yeah. No, I was kidding.
So, for an example, for anyone who can view this, or we'll describe it for you, this is the same brand. This is Z-Man. This is their popping frog. This is their walking one. They both walk really well. They have the same belly shape, but they both came with the same length skirts. This is the stock skirt. That's like
5 inches long.
it's huge. It's crazy long. I cut this. It's still long. I'm probably gonna trim this even more.
Yeah,
but I trimmed this down. It's half of its length.
and you can trim them shorter than that. Like, look at this one.
Yep, people have like just tufts on it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people will often do is they'll cut it with a small taper on the skirt, and they'll cut one leg like a half inch shorter than the other.
Yeah.
And what that does is, as it's sitting in the water, when you're trying to walk it, if you have the same amount of resistance on both sides, can sometimes be difficult to get that walking motion started. Whereas if you have one leg that's shorter, it's going to have a little bit less resistance in the water, so it's actually going to pull to that side. So you'll start that first kind of like zig a bit easier if you can give yourself an advantage, like having one leg a bit shorter, and bass don't care.
Yeah.
If anything, fish, we know they look for the wounded out of a school of minnows and whatnot. So if you have a gimp frog,
I don't know
maybe
if we can
it's an
say the
advantage.
word gimp online, but don't report us.
You're looking at the price point of stuff, you can get frogs like even this. Like, this is the trash panda from 13 Fishing.
Yeah.
And this one, I think regular price is what, $18?
$19
This thing was $3.
Yeah.
However, which one is going to catch more fish? 100% the trash panda.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at the scum frogs, like I said, these are my favorites. These cost...
They're very reasonable.
I think they're like $13.
Yep.
Not bad.
And if you get the trophy series, which is the one I really
I think
like,
they're 11.
they're like $10. Yeah, $10.99.
The Terminator walking frog, they're pricier. They're up again 18. Sometimes you get them on sale though. I got mine, I think, for like $8. They're on half price or whatever.
And like we said, so the perfect jig frogs, I think they're
Perfect jig's a really good budget option.
I think they're
That'll get you
$11.
on everything. Yep.
The live target frog, I think they're about 14 now. One of the best frogs that I've used for the money, these are $9.99, is the Booyah Pad Crasher.
Yep.
And for a budget frog, they walk really good. The hookup ratio is good. The hooks are good. And they're $10.
Yeah.
Can't recommend them enough. And then you can get super bougie, like Mega Bass makes frogs. And they're,
Oh, yeah.
Again, and like the Jackal Gavacho I was telling you about, those are almost $20. But like, if you like frog fishing and you like your frog to do a specific thing, buy the frog that you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't look at all frogs and say, oh, they're all exactly the same. They all look the same. They have rubber skirts and they have a hollow body and two hooks coming out the back. But there's a lot of differences in how they fish. There are some that I've caught. There's one that was the Yappa frog. It's disgusting. The Yappa frog. I was really excited about that because it has a jitterbug scoop on the face that would kind of like bubble as you retrieve. And I was like, okay, that's kind of walks for you. I'm down to try that.
Yeah.
And I had tons of blow-ups on that thing.
Yeah.
Never landed a single fish on that because
The hook's too small.
the hook's too small, and that rubber face would like pop the mouth right over top of those hook points. So
That being said, I've heard guys say the opposite. They're like, I smash fish on those. So I think the perfect frog, it depends on how you fish.
yes.
Okay. But in general, I agree with you on that frog. The hookup ratio is bad.
So a couple things just as general reminders. We talked about trimming the skirts. This is kind of like general frog tips.
Okay.
So trimming the skirts, knowing how your frog operates when, or what it's designed to do, and what area you're fishing. We talked about that. Another thing which is huge is waiting to set the hook. So any top water, you don't wait for this. You don't set the hook on the splash. You set the hook on the weight. So, or if you can visually see that it's in the mouth,
Like
mouth
the saying,
closed.
wait until you feel the weight. So hard.
It's funny because when Jesse first started showing me how to fish frogs, and I was getting into it, and he's like, oh, you have to wait. And then every single time he's like, fish goes, boom, and his rod goes flying, and the frog comes flying out. And I looked at the back of the package of the scum frog that I had bought. This is a newer one, but it says right here, when fish strikes, wait 2 seconds before you set the hook.
Yeah.
There's instructions on the back of a lot of frog packages telling you don't set the hook instantly.
It's a common problem.
Because what's going to happen is you have a frog on the top of the water, a bass comes up, there's the splash. It hasn't even closed its mouth in that frog. And you're like, oh, phew,
yeah, pull it right out of his mouth.
So what happens is they grab it, they land back in the water, their mouth is closed, they start swimming away. You have a couple seconds before they'll spit the frog.
Yeah.
Most of the time. There are times when most of the time they don't even have it in their mouth though. They'll come up and just hit it with their face and pop it out of the way. But if they have it in their mouth, you have a couple seconds for them to land, swim, and they'll still have that frog in their mouth. They're not thinking about what it feels like yet. They're not saying, oh, why does this frog have hard legs? Like,
yeah.
And then reel up the slack, set the hook.
Yeah.
One of the things that we'll see as well is you'll have a lot of bass, like we talked about, they have very poor aim.
Yeah.
So if you're fishing weeds especially, you'll have a bass come up and he'll hit it and your frog will go flying. Like 10 feet away from where that bass was.
I think sometimes they hit it to stun it.
Yeah. And what happens is oftentimes they're looking for it again.
Yeah.
So if you have that, cast it, reel in real quick, cast again. Don't try and like, oh, my bait's 4 feet over here. It's close enough. I'll wait. Generally what the pros recommend is get that in quick, make an accurate cast directly on top of where that fish blew up. Because he's waiting for that frog to land so he can inhale it.
Yeah.
Because he just tried to stun it.
Yeah.
So a lot of time that's the case. So if another good tip then is cast right on top of that fish. I know Jesse and I'm trying to do better in asking permission. Is like, you mind if I cast there? And he's like, yeah, go cast. Same with me. If a fish blows up and I miss it, and it's going to take me a bit to reel in the 80 feet because I long bombed something, I'll have Jesse, cast over there. I just had a boil or something on it.
Yeah.
So if you have a fishing partner, maybe share the love.
Yeah.
If not, then get that bait in quick, recast fast.
I thought we could go over color quick because we're almost out of time.
Yep.
And I've had a few people message me this over the years on our Instagram, and they're like, the color doesn't matter when it comes to frogs. I've heard so many people say that, and I agree to a certain extent, but that's false, in my opinion. And the way that I do it is white, black, and bright. I'm not saying that you need to have like a lot of these frogs now, like some of these scum frogs, they have like photo print finishes on them.
Yeah.
The finish is amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like different visibility, like whatever is more visible to a frog, everyone's like, oh, when a bass looks up, all they see is the silhouette against the sun. Yeah, that would make sense if it was sunny and the fish is always looking up directly from underneath. They're not always doing that. And frogs don't sit legit full out on the surface.
Yeah.
They sit like,
sit
especially
back.
the scum frog.
Yeah.
Half the body and legs are underwater.
Yep.
And the thing is, I don't just make up stupid opinions without any backing. So what we did, we filmed frogs and poppers underwater and pop them. And you can see as you pull a frog and a popper forward, sometimes it dives underwater and rolls.
Yep.
And you can see the color 100%. I'm not saying we're the same as bass and can see stuff, but the top and bottom of the frog does get seen by bass. We've had days where like sometimes we're fishing a white frog. White is one of my favorite colors for frogs. And I think it's just because it's visible. And you're smashing fish one day, the next day they won't touch it. You tie on a black frog and they're inhaling it.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't matter because the color doesn't matter.
Or
wait, it does.
We'll be fishing white frogs and we'll be getting hits, but no hookups.
Yeah.
And so we'll switch to a more natural or yellow belly, which is very common for, like, this is a bullfrog color. Yellow, even leopard frogs, they often have like a yellowish color to their belly. So it's
especially
a natural color. And so when you have, because even that's mainly white on that one, but we weren't getting hookups on the white frogs. Switched to a more natural color.
Yeah.
We actually started hooking these bass, fishing the exact same spots, the same fish, the same retrieve.
Yeah. So it can make a difference. I'm not saying you need to have like realistic photo print finishes on your frogs, but generally I'd always start off with black and white.
Yep.
And I'll use one or another depending. And then, like Andrew said, there are situations where I want something bright. Like some of these frogs, they have like a yellow belly, like a bright chartreuse belly, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then some people, it's a confidence thing too. Some people are like, I like brown, I like gray, I like this color, I like that. My advice would be buy 3 frogs. Buy a popping frog that is black or white. Buy a regular walking frog, and then buy a slop frog. Buy 3 frogs. Experiment with colors and just have fun with it. You don't need to have like 50 frogs. You literally only need like 3 or 4.
To cover all bases, you have maximum 9. You can cover everything. You have one of each color in a slop, in a walking, and a popping.
Yeah.
You have 3 colors in each.
And realistically, if I had black and white, I'd be happy. 6 frogs.
Yep.
And most days when I go out, I literally only bring a few frogs.
Yeah.
Black and white, that's good. And one of my favorite frogs recently has been the goat toads by Z-Man. It's a soft plastic frog. You hook this weedless.
It's awesome.
And you just cast it out and it floats. And you just reeled in. And I got it in white because guess what? White works really good. And it's been crazy. But yeah, there's so many different frogs. Like right now on the table, there's 25 frogs. And we've caught fish on almost all of these.
Yep.
And some, the ones that we really talked highly about, they're ones that we've caught dozens of fish on.
For sure.
And would you buy them again? 100%.
100%. I have.
And I'm sure there's frogs in this pile too that I wouldn't buy again. And some other people probably love those frogs. So really, you have to find the frog that works well for you.
Yeah. So we've given some good options there of our preferences. Like you said, go out, try a few. You don't have to break the bank to get some frogs that we really like. Like I said, you get a pack of goat toads and a pack of hooks. What is that? Maybe
$12.
$12, $13. And then you have four frogs of the same color. But so you have your scum frogs. Again, they go from between 10 to 12. You can get into the higher end, but you can get a lot of good frogs for under $12, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're willing to spend that much on a Rapala? Try it on a frog. And I'll tell you, you get on a frog bite, you will fall in love with a topwater strike. I know there's a lot of people who fish bass who have never fished frogs. I was one of those guys for a long time.
Yeah, I was like, what?
And I'm like, that doesn't make sense why frogs would work. And as soon as I tried doing it and caught my first fish in a frog, I love it. Like that's one of my favorite ways. It probably is my favorite way to catch largemouth bass is frog fishing.
Yeah.
So 100%, that's something we wholeheartedly encourage you to try. The last, very quickly, Jesse has a combo because we always get asked, what would you recommend to use? So this is Jesse's new frog setup.
Well, the rod's new. I got it. Well, it's not new. I got it last year. So anyway, generally speaking, there are tons of different rods you could use frogs for, but generally speaking, in Ontario, I'm not talking in Okeechobee in Florida, you're going to want at least a medium heavy rod. And that's around sparse cover. If you're fishing lily pads, you're going to want a heavy.
Yes.
Some guys use an extra heavy. What I've come to really like is a slightly shorter rod, 7.3 heavy. And I'm going to load up the reel with anywhere between 40 and 50 pound. You don't need to use 65. I tried it for a few years. It's overkill. I've never snapped 50.
Yeah.
You're snapping 50. I don't know what's going on, but
you're setting the hook way too hard.
So I'd recommend it depends. Some people like a shorter rod, some people like a longer rod, but I recommend a heavy with at least 40 pound braid. 50's better, 65 okay if you want, and then a high gear ratio reel, a bait casting reel. This is a Corrado XG, which is like the 8.5-to-1 reel, and it pulls up almost like 40 inches of line. It's insane. I've also had my last frog reel, which I still have. It was the Abu Garcia Rocket. The SX Rocket, which is a 9.1-to-1. And literally, the advantage of that is you can fire to a hole. Say you get a blow up and it misses. You can reel in really fast and cast back before the bass loses interest. You can cover water so much faster. You don't need a high speed reel like that, but I'd recommend at least a 7.1-to-1. Yeah, you're not going to want a slow reel, especially when you're just covering water, casting frogs.
Especially too, if you are fishing heavy cover and you hook a bass, one of the best ways to retrieve it, you have a heavy action rod. If you can get that bass's head above the weeds and you just reel it in so he stays and just skis on top of those weeds, that's your best chance for retrieving that fish. Because otherwise, if you don't have the power in that rod, that line to get that fish up and then speed to reel it in, he'll put his head down, swim right into the thick weeds, and now you've got an extra 20 pounds of greenery you're fighting on the edge of your rod.
Lily pad stems.
That's how you break your rod.
And that's how you lose fish. Yeah. But I mean, it happens. Sometimes we'll use a slightly... we won't be frog fishing, for example, and we'll go to a lake where we generally aren't going to bring a frog rod, and then you'll have like a medium heavy, you tie in a frog, you cast into the thick stuff, and you hook a fish. You're basically going to have to drive in and get the fish.
Yes. So it can be done, and it's not recommended to do so.
Yeah.
Another quick reference again to our sponsor for the episode. Again, Bass Magnet. It's going to be a good mix on the prize pack that he's going to send out to the fortunate winner.
And I'm hoping that I'm almost positive it's going to be these jelly shads. They're really nice. We're not even just saying that. You could, like I said, versatility wise, really good chatterbait trailer.
I'm excited to use it on a chatterbait for sure.
He also makes his own custom jig heads for these with weed guards on them. So you can use it as a weed guard or as a jig with a weed guard, as a chatterbait trailer. One way that I was thinking of fishing this is just Texas rig sideways.
Yep.
Almost like one of those weird gill
You know
baits.
me, I'm going to try and and hook it weightless and flip it under docks.
Yeah.
Try and slow retrieve with it or something.
It's
So,
one of those baits that you're like, it's versatile. You can use it for tons of things. There's all these little baits that you have in your tackle box that it's like, oh, it only does this, it only does that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get away from that. I want baits that can do lots of things, and this is one of those baits.
Yep.
And it's
for
made in
sure.
Ontario. So anyway, we'd like to thank Mike again for being the sponsor of this episode. And I know he's going to be listening to this. So, hey, Mike, thanks again.
So we thank you for everyone for listening again. We actually just, at date of recording, we passed 15,000 downloads on, not including our YouTube views.
Yeah.
So that's just from,
and that was 2
streaming
weeks
on the
ago.
podcast.
That was 2 weeks ago if you're listening to that today.
Yeah. So that's absolutely amazing that we're getting this kind of return on what we're putting into the show. We love that people are appreciating it. If you have the opportunity, please, if you're not doing so already, subscribe, follow us, leave a rating, leave a review on whatever you're listening to us on. And if you feel the desire to support us in another way, we do have Patreon. That's what it's called. We have a Patreon, which Jesse has linked below as well, if you would like to give us some support in that way as well. But the best thing you can do is, I know every podcaster always says, the best thing you can do is just listen to us. But it's true. We love seeing the reach that we get with the people who are enjoying this podcast. So thank you very much for that.
And another thing you can do is support our sponsors, not only the ones from this week, but the ones that we've had in the past. And when you do purchase something from them, really generally, we're mostly paired up with Ontario-based companies.
Yep.
Let them know that we sent you. And
For
that
sure.
you thought of us when you were typing in your credit card number and putting an order in. So we appreciate that. And I'm sure all these small businesses too in Ontario appreciate it too. We actually just had a quick example. One of our previous sponsors sent me a screenshot of all the sales he got. And I'm hoping some of them were from our podcast because he got all these sales the week that he was sponsored on the podcast. So that made me feel really good because I'm like, okay, he did really good last week.
Yeah.
So that made me feel good. And when you buy their baits, you're not just making yourself feel good, but you also get baits. So anyway, thanks again for that.
Fantastic. So again, thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a great rest of whatever you're doing, whether it's driving, reading a book, and multitasking. You're also listening to a podcast like a savage. But
just remember, I'm going to leave this last word for you. Loons are like airplanes.
And Michael Phelps.